Danielle?
Good morning. My name is Danielle Hopkins, and I'm an instructor with the Educational Services team here in Redlands, California. Joining me today is Mark Ho, who is also an instructor here in Redlands. I want to welcome you all today to this live training seminar, Introduction to ArcIMS. Today's seminar will be broken into 4 different parts. To start, we will look at what ArcIMS is and some of the architecture behind the product that makes a website work. We will then go through the 3 main steps for creating your own GIS website using ArcIMS: making a map, creating the service, and then creating an ArcIMS viewer to look at that service with. Throughout the presentation, we will show you examples and provide software demonstrations. We will also have the opportunity for question and answer sessions at regular intervals. Let's begin with the basics of ArcIMS and the architecture behind it. First of all, what is ArcIMS? Well, the name stands for Arc Internet Map Server, and what it is a framework or foundation for delivering dynamic maps, sharing GIS data and services using the Internet. These data and services can be local or they can be web-based. One of the advantages in using ArcIMS is the ability to provide a common environment for working with a given set of data. In many cases, this environment or website is much easier to use than the full application might be. It's you who can decide how many tools and which data will be available. Speaking of data, ArcIMS gives the opportunity for wider data access and sharing from within the organization, as well as through the integration of information from other agencies. We say that the ArcIMS architecture is open and scalable. What we mean by this is that not all of the components are created by ESRI, and therefore the configurations used can vary. As the data and purpose of the site changes and the activity on a website grows, so can the ArcIMS configuration. Let's look at some examples of ArcIMS websites that implement these concepts. ArcIMS can be applied to many different industries for data distribution and sharing. Disciplines such as natural resources use ArcIMS to share information about the land or environment such as mining, forestry, land cover, or agriculture. In the area of local government, cadastral and parcel data is commonly posted on the Internet using ArcIMS websites. Applications of ArcIMS for commercial businesses include such things as site location analysis and market analysis using property and demographic information. Another powerful use for ArcIMS is in the delivery of live, up-to-date data to your users either in their offices or in the field. Dynamic data such as crime locations, flood areas, incidents of disease, and natural disasters can be posted for use by managers in many locations, some of which can be across the world. Let's look at an example of an ArcIMS website. The City of Sugar Land has developed several different websites that cover topics such as council districts, parks, utilities, land zoning districts, voting precincts, and a series of aerial photography. All of their sites have a common look and feel using the city colors and logo and a similar layout. We will use the City of Sugar Land Zoning District's website to examine these different components. You can see in the schematic on this slide that a basic ArcIMS website includes a map display area, a listing of the layers being displayed which the user can interact with, and a legend showing the symbology used in the map display. This site has been customized to include tools with text on the buttons for non-GIS users with the option to click on the Advanced Menu button to switch into a graphical toolbar. Basic functionality such as navigation, panning, zooming is provided along with the ability to query based on an address, intersection, street, or place. This website is a good example of out-of-the-box functionality that is available with ArcIMS. The GeoMac website is a good example of providing dynamic data using ArcIMS. This site is developed and maintained by the USGS in cooperation with several federal firefighting agencies and private companies to provide up-to-the-minute information about fire locations and perimeters in the United States. Along with the navigational, display, and output capabilities of the site, users can display information about individual fires, such as the name of the fire, current acreage, and other fire status information. So, now that we have seen what can be created, let's look at how all of this works. The scenario is that we have a client that is viewing and using our website. Each time they perform a query or navigate the map, they are communicating with the ArcIMS server. This communication uses Hypertext Transfer Protocol, or HTTP, to transfer the information over the Internet. So, the client begins this HTTP communication with the ArcIMS server by performing a task on the website. We say that they are initiating a request. This request passes through the Internet to the server, where a response is put together and sent back to the client. The combination of the request plus the response is a transaction. The concept of a transaction is very important in ArcIMS. When considering website traffic volume, you could have very few users generating many requests, or you may have many users generating few requests. It is only the total number of transactions that is important. What we have here is a very simple view of the ArcIMS architecture. We will now take a deeper look at what is really going on. ArcIMS uses a multi-tiered design, meaning that there are several different areas that work together to serve GIS data and functionality to the client. The first tier is the presentation tier. This includes the ArcIMS client-side viewers used for accessing, displaying, and analyzing geographic data. Second is the business logic tier. These server-side components are used for handling the requests and administering the site. We will discuss each of the different components in subsequent slides. Third, we have the data tier, which includes all data sources available for use with ArcIMS. These data sources can be both database and file-based sources. Remembering back to our conversation about transactions, the request is initiated on the client side at the presentation tier. It passes through the business logic tier, which accesses the data tier. The response is generated by the spatial server and sent back to the client once again. ArcIMS also includes applications that come together as the management tier. These applications are used to manage and create ArcIMS websites. We will be focusing on these applications through the next few sections of the presentation. For now, let's think about each one of these tiers individually. On the client side, we need to have an environment to view and interact with GIS data. Remember, this is where the request is initiated. There are a number of different options for viewers available. We could group these into 3 categories. Group 1 includes standard applications that already exist, such as ArcExplorer Java Edition, ArcExplorer Web, ArcGIS ArcMap, ArcCatalog, or ArcPath. Group 2 includes the HTML and Java viewers that can be created using ArcIMS out-of-the-box applications. The last group of viewers include both customized web clients as well as customized applications. There are many different types and methods that can be used to build these. Once the request is made by the client, the first component it will meet with is the web server. Web servers are third-party software that enable our website to run. The web server passes the request through to the ArcIMS connector. It is the ArcIMS connector that, connects the web server to the ArcIMS application server. Once a request gets past the ArcIMS connector, it needs to be in a particular language for the remaining components to understand. It is the responsibility of the connector to make sure that the request is in that language. A translator, if you will. The ArcIMS application server is a very important component of ArcIMS. This is the portion that handles the load distribution of incoming requests and tracks ArcIMS services. I sometimes think of this as being similar to a traffic cop, directing the traffic and making sure it continues to flow. Once the request gets to the spatial server, it is time for a response to be put together. It is the spatial server that will look at what the client is requesting, access the source data, and put together a response in the correct format and send it back to the client. This is where all the work is going on. To be clear, we often think of a server as a big machine sitting in the back room somewhere. Well, in the case of ArcIMS, we're actually talking about processes running on the machine, rather than the machine itself. If you take a look at the Task Manager, you will find several processes relating to ArcIMS. So in review, ArcIMS is a framework for distributing GIS data and functionality using the Internet. This occurs through a combination of client and server-side components that communicate using HTTP and a series of transactions. These different components make up the presentation tier, the business logic tier, and the management tier. We will now take a moment to answer a few of your questions. Mark?
Thanks, Danielle. We have a number of good questions out there, so I'll do my best to answer some of them. First comes from Mark in Quebec. Is a web server included with ArcIMS? And the answer to that question is no. In fact, you do get to pick and choose what web server you want to use with ArcIMS. There are a number of third-party web servers that you can use and that we support. Two of the more common ones are Internet Information Server, IIS, which is included with many Microsoft Windows operating systems, and also Apache, which is available free off their webpage. But there are a number of other web servers that we support. For example, IBM HTTP Server, Oracle Application Server, Sun Java System, and WebLogic. If you are having any questions about what web server you want to choose, I strongly suggest that you go to support.esri.com, where you can take a look at the system requirements that are required for ArcIMS, and to also find out which versions of these web servers are supported. Also have a great question from Ivan in St. Paul, asking, does the web server need to be installed on the same machine as your data? And the answer is, it depends on your configuration. For all the different components that Danielle described, you can install all of those in one machine if you wish. And maybe that's ideal if you're running a production web page or if you're running something with lower volumes. However, you can also create a distributed installation where you can have those different components on different machines if you wish. And that kind of goes to Danielle's point of scalability. If you feel that your volume of your web page is growing, you can actually add more machines to your configuration to handle that volume. So that's one of those benefits of ArcIMS, the scalability and flexibility of the product. Another question comes from James in Rochester, asking, can you have more than one ArcIMS spatial server in your installation? And to the answer to that is absolutely yes, especially if you are dealing with higher volume web pages. It's that scalability thing again, being able to handle and be able to be flexible as volumes change. So yes, you can have more than one spatial server to handle more loads and more requests and transactions that occur on your web page. And in fact, you could actually have more than one web server or application server in your configuration as well. And that goes to the point of redundancy. If one of your components goes down for any reason, then the other components can take over. So for performance and for distributing your load, having multiple web servers and application servers is actually pretty beneficial. Okay, one more question. From Karen in Louisville, do I need a license of ArcGIS to use ArcIMS? And the answer is no. The licensing for ArcIMS is separate to what you are used to in ArcGIS Desktop, so you do not need to have an ArcGIS Desktop license to have ArcIMS on your machine. I'll answer more questions later, but I'm going to return it now to Danielle.
Thanks very much, Mark. All right, now that we have learned a little bit about how ArcIMS works, let's take a look at the different steps involved in making an ArcIMS website. Creating an ArcIMS website can be as easy as 1, 2, 3. First, we need to create a map, define the layers that will be used, and what they're going to look like. Next, we need to create a service from that map that will be able to be published out to the internet. Last, we can then create a viewer for our service. All of these steps can be accomplished using the ArcIMS management tier applications. Let's get started with the process of making an ArcIMS website. The first step is to make a map. I can do this in one of two applications, ArcIMS Author or ArcGIS ArcMap. First, let's look at ArcIMS Author. This application comes with ArcIMS and is used for defining the content and rendering for a service. It is here that we can add in our data layers, establish layer properties in rendering, and save our work as a map configuration file or .axl file. Through the use of catalog in ArcIMS Author, we have the ability to add in different types of data, including shapefiles, image files, and ArcSDE layers to our map. Connections are made to ArcSDE through the same catalog menu. For those of you used to making maps, this will be a familiar environment. If you haven't done so before, then you will find this application one that is very easy to learn and work with. When the layers are initially added to the file, the default symbology is used. We can now work with each layer individually to set its rendering properties. In the Layer Properties menu, we can work with symbols, labels, and a few general properties for each layer. Let's take a look at each one of these areas. On the Symbols tab, we can set our symbology based on some simple predefined options available to us. Here we see that the cities have been set to red circles, and we have used some color fill symbols for each individual country in Southeast Asia. Author also allows us to create some more complex symbols. One option is the group renderer. This symbol is actually a combination of two or more simple symbols to make a new one. For example, we have combined a large red star with a blue circle to fill the center of that star. Or you might want to create a more interesting and representative road symbol by overlaying a thin dashed line upon a thick gray one. Another option for rendering is to use a different symbol depending on the display scale of the data. You can see here that as we zoom into the data, the symbol for the cities will change. The use of labels on a map is very important to the overall effect. We can label our features very simply using font type, size, and color, or we can get more complicated by adding in various different effects, angles, symbols, and font changes. There are one or two other properties that can be set for each layer, including a more intuitive layer display name. Frequently, we work with data sets that have names that are meaningful to us, however, are not so meaningful to our users. An example of this might be the World 30 shapefile that has been used as a grid in our Indonesia dataset. Through the general settings, I can change the layer name to something like grid, which will change the layer name not only in the ArcIMS Author environment, but also in the final website. A second property that can be set for each layer is a scale factor. The scale factor determines whether or not a layer will be displayed at a certain scale. In this example, we set a scale range for the cities layer. Once we are finished specifying our different map layers and their rendering properties, we must save our work. ArcIMS Author saves a text file that's actually written in ArcXML. This is referred to as the map configuration file. Map configuration files do not actually contain the GIS data to be used in the website. They in fact only hold a reference or path name to that data. The Axle file can be opened and edited using ArcIMS Author, but you also have the option to use a text or XML editor to work with your Axle file manually and extend the functionality of the ArcIMS services. The ArcIMS Author application is not the only method we have to define map content. ArcGIS ArcMap can also be used. ArcIMS can be viewed as another method for sharing ArcGIS map documents with others using the Internet. Some of the reasons people use map documents include the access to enhanced cartographic symbology, the ability to access more data formats, including CAD, personal geodatabases, version geodatabases, annotation, and coverages. In addition to these capabilities, you can also get access to different data frames and the layout through customized requests to the spatial server. ArcGIS saves to a binary file called a map document or .mxd. This file, or a published map file, PMF, created using ArcPublisher, can be used for an ArcIMS service. We will now do a demonstration to show you how to use both of these applications to author your website. So I'm going to bring up the ArcIMS Author application. From here you'll see that I already have two layers loaded. I have my counties and I have my railroads. And what I'm going to do now is go up to my main toolbar and click on this Add Layers button. The Add Layers environment opens up this catalog, which I mentioned earlier. And I have the option here to connect to my ArcSDE, or I can navigate to locally stored data. In my case, I have a San Diego directory with a number of shapefiles. So I'm going to click on this Major Attractions, and holding down the Control key, I'm also going to add in Major Roads. I move up to this left corner and click the Add Layers button. Now I also have an image file that I'd like to add. So at the top of the catalog, I'm going to change my file type to image files. And when I click on this, I see that I have a map TIFF image. So I'm going to also add that into my map display and close the catalog. I'll now turn on each one of these different layers. And so what you'll see is that it comes in with a default symbology. Now if I zoom into my data, what you'll also notice is that in the order of my layers, I've got the TIFF image up at the top of the list. And so it's actually being drawn on top of my vector data. So I can change the order by right-clicking on that TIFF image, and I'm going to move the layer to the bottom. So by doing this, you'll see that Author is actually drawing from the bottom to the top of the list. Now I can work with each individual layer to set some of the properties. So I'm going to work with my Major Attractions layer first, and go up to my main toolbar on the far right side to my Layer Properties button. What this does is opens up the Major Attraction Properties menu. And here I'm going to change my symbol to be a star, and I'm going to use a bright blue color. I'm also going to increase the size up to a size 12 and click Apply. So you'll see here that I've changed the symbology on the display. Now what I'm also going to do is change the main layer name. So I'm going over to my General tab, and I'm going to type in a new name that's going to make more sense to my users. So Major Attractions. Click Apply for this change and click OK. So you'll see now that I have this layer display name changed and I've got blue stars. Now I'm also going to make some changes to my roads. So this time I'm going to do a right click to get the context menu and access my layer properties menu this way. So here I'm going to just switch over to a simple black line, leave it size 1. Click apply. I'm also going to go over and just quickly change my layer display name here again from Maj Roads to Major Roads and apply that change. Now with my roads, I would also like to do some labeling. So I'm going to click on my Labels tab. Now here, I have got to specify which field I'd like to do my labeling with. So I have a special field called Label that I'm going to use. I'm going to have an Arial font, size 8. Now I can also specify how I want to have these labels placed. In our case, I'm going to stick with this above the line. So click Apply for these changes. Now, what I'm also going to do is work with this scale-dependent renderer. Now, in this case, I'm setting a scale-dependent renderer for my labels from this Labels tab. So there's a button here to the right of the field. I'm going to click on this menu, and what I'm going to do here is set a scale dependency for a maximum of 100,000. So say OK, and apply that change as well. You'll notice that my labels have now disappeared because when I look down, or at the moment due to my refreshing, but my scale is displayed down at the bottom of the author environment. So as I zoom out, then what I'm going to see is that those labels are going to disappear as that scale changes. So what I'm going to do is also quickly set a scale dependency for my TIFF image. So again, I right-click onto the layer properties, and you'll notice that the menu for the TIFF images or imagery is going to be a little bit different. And in this case, I'm setting a scale dependency as to whether this layer is going to be displayed or not. And so what I'm going to do is say, never show this TIFF image above 1 to 50,000, and apply that change also. So now you've seen that this image has disappeared as well. So now that I have all of the rendering properties set, I'm going to go and zoom to this layer here to set the initial extent of my display, and I'm going to save my file. So I do File, Save As, and I'm going to navigate to a different location on my machine. I'm going to use the C ArcIMS Axle folder. And here I'm going to give it a name called San Diego. And save that. All right. I mentioned earlier that ArcIMS Author is not the only application that you can use to define your map content. We can also use ArcGIS ArcMap. So here's an example of a map document that I created earlier. It has 2 layers in it. I have those major roads, and I also have the county boundaries. I can use my normal ArcMap tools that I might be familiar with to do my symbology and set up the different properties. Once I'm finished with that map document, I'm going to do a File, Save As, and then I can save this out as well as my MXD. In this case, I've called it OV San Diego. In review, in this section, we looked at the 3 different steps for creating an ArcIMS website: make a map, create a service, and create a viewer. We also looked at the first step and saw how we can use the ArcIMS Author application or ArcGIS ArcMap to create a map for our website. I will now pass things over to Mark to address a few more of your questions.
Thanks, Danielle. Once again, lots of great questions coming in, so I'll do my best to answer. Siva from LipHook asks a question, can we have ArcView 9.0 and ArcIMS 9.0 on the same machine? And the answer is yes. In previous versions of ArcIMS, that was an issue, but from this 9 generation and forward, that will not be an issue anymore, so that's good news. We have a question from Howard in Lancaster, Pennsylvania. Can you set up passwords to allow only certain people to see certain data and certain web published maps? And the answer to that is yes. Through ArcXML, we have provided a number of configuration files that will allow you to establish a restricted service where you can set who has access to certain web pages and if they need any username and password. And a lot of that is well documented within the support webpage at support.esri.com, and there's also some documentation to help you set that up. Marcus from Lansing has a great question. Can you link attribute tables between two shapefiles and derive information from the link online? And the answer to that is also yes. Danielle was mentioning a little bit about ArcXML. If you were to go into that map configuration file, the AXL file, and edit it within an XML editor, you can establish through ArcXML that link between two tables. And once again, that's well documented within our help documentation. Victor from Calgary has a good question. Can I use pictures or graphics as symbols? And the answer to that is also yes. There's a couple of ways to be able to tackle that. One is to save it as a graphic, like a GIF image, and then you can use ArcIMS Author and choose that image option to add that to symbolize your point. Another great way of doing that is if you use something from a true type font, a character perhaps from an ESRI font. Once again, if you edit that map configuration file within an XML editor or a text editor, you can add in a true type marker symbol element, and from that element you'll be able to choose what font you want to use and what specific character you want to use from that font. So the answer to that is also yes. Here's another question from Nick from Tempe. Is it hard to edit a map configuration file? And actually the answer is no. ArcXML is a very easy language to understand and to be able to write code for. So you can go into a regular text editor like Notepad, or you can download an XML editor. There's a number of shareware programs and commercial software as well. And from that, you'll be able to read and edit XML code very easily. In fact, we also supply a document type definition file, a DTD file, to make that editing even easier. I also really want to strongly advise to take a look at the ArcXML Programmer's Reference Guide, available online at support.esri.com, which will help you understand more about what ArcXML is all about. Okay, more questions later, but now back to Danielle.
Thanks again, Mark. All right, let's take a look at step 2 in the process of creating our ArcIMS website. Here we want to create a service. In order to create an ArcIMS service, we will again go back to our management tier and use the ArcIMS Administrator application this time. The first question we have to address is what exactly is a service? A service is what allows our map content or GIS data to be published on the internet. It is in fact this service that we are viewing in the ArcIMS website. Each service is dependent on a single file, although you could use that same file to create many services. You could think of this as a one-to-many relationship. There are several different types of services that we can create. Our choice of service will depend upon our clients and what it is we want to deliver to them. The most common is the ArcIMS image service, of which there are two types, image and ArcMap image. Image services do exactly what their name infers. They send snapshots or pictures of vector and image data back to the client. Now remember, we can use ArcIMS Author to create a map configuration file and ArcGIS ArcMap to create an MXD. These files are used to create the image and ArcMap image services, respectively. There are 3 other types of services that we can create. Also using a map configuration file, we can create an ArcIMS feature service. This type of service actually streams vector data to the client side and only makes a request to the spatial server when additional information is required. The metadata service allows data producers to publish their metadata to a repository and data consumers to search that repository. Route Server is an ArcIMS extension that uses specially optimized data for locating street addresses and planning optimal routes between different points. The type of service determines what the spatial server is going to give back. An image service will give images, feature services will give features, etc. All of these different ArcIMS services can be created in the ArcIMS Administrator application. It is here that we can interface with the ArcIMS application server, aka the traffic cop, do our general site administration, and create, start, and stop ArcIMS services. So we'll now take a look at how to create a service from that map configuration file we created in the first demonstration. So here I have the ArcIMS Administrator application, and you can see that I have one service already running here on the machine. So what I'm going to do is create a new service by clicking up here on the main toolbar, the New Service button. This opens up a menu in which I need to give 3 basic pieces of information for every service I want to make. The first thing is that I'm going to enter a name for my service. The second thing I'm going to do is specify what the source file is for that service. So, earlier I created this San Diego.axl file using ArcIMS Author. So I'm going to use that as my source. Now, I need to also specify what type of service I want to make. So I'm going to use an image service. You'll notice that when I chose the image service, this lower portion of this menu became active. So I have a number of other properties that I can set. The first one here is on this Server Output tab. I have options as to what type of image I want to be giving back to my users. GIFs, JPEGs, or PNGs can be used. I'm going to stick with the JPEG default. Now you also need to give a directory location for these images to be stored. So I'm going to use the C ArcIMS output directory, and then for the clients or web browsers to be able to pick up those images, I need to specify a URL or HTTP location for them to get to those image files. So here I've got HTTP localhost, which is this machine, and the output directory. Now I've also got this advanced tab, and here I have options as to how frequently I want to clear out that directory that's storing the images. If you can imagine, every time somebody pans or zooms or works with my website, I'm generating a new image. So I might specify every 5 minutes I'm going to clean out that directory, and then I can also set a maximum image size for images that are going to be generated. So I'm going to click OK on the menu to create my new service. And what you'll see now is that I have a new San Diego service of type image. Now back to that OV San Diego. I can click on this service that already existed, and if I go to my main menu, I can click on the Properties button. And if I take a look at the properties for this service, you can see that I have used that OV San Diego MXD that I showed you earlier. And this time I used Image Server ArcMap or ArcMap Image Service as my type. All right, at this point, I've actually got services running, and these services can be accessed by already existing applications. So I'm going to show you how you can do this by using the ArcMap environment. So I'm going to open a new map document, and the way that I normally do, I'm going to use this Add Data button. Now here I've got an option for GIS servers. So I'm going to go into this area, and I have here Add ArcIMS Server. So if I go into here, I get this menu. What I'm going to do is add in a URL for my machine, which is the local host. And I can get a list of all of the services that are actually running here on my machine. I'm going to just specify one of the services, but you could add in your connection to include all of them. So now I click OK. And what I'm going to have is a connection here in my Add Data to the local host. So if I move into here, I can choose my OV San Diego service and load that up into this already existing application. What you see here is my county boundaries and my roads, just like I showed you earlier. Now what's interesting is that when I right-click on this and I look at my properties, what I'm going to see for source this time is an ArcMap image service coming from Internet Server localhost, and its name is OV San Diego. So to review, there are several different types of services that can be created with ArcIMS, including image, feature, metadata, and route. We use the ArcIMS administrator to manage these services. Once you have a service created, you can actually view that service with an existing application, as we just saw in the demonstration using ArcMap. We'll now take a couple more minutes to answer your questions.
Thanks, Danielle. Carlos from Maracaibo has a great question. Can I use geodatabase data with ArcIMS? And the answer is yes. As Danielle described, you can add geodatabase data within an MXD file in ArcMap in order to add in your geodatabase data. So we do have a solution for you with ArcIMS. Wendy from Washington, are you required to save the map configuration file to the ArcIMS Axle folder, or may be saved in other locations as well? And the answer to that question is you can store it anywhere on your server machine as long as ArcIMS knows where that folder is. So it can be stored anywhere you want. Nancy from Bartlesville, how do you use the MXD in ArcIMS and where do you place it? Well, similar to the last question, you can store that MXD file anywhere on your hard drive on your server side as long as ArcIMS knows where it is. And how do you use that MXD file? Basically, as Danielle described, you can use the ArcIMS administrator to point to the MXD file that you want to serve over the internet and create that ArcMap image service of that MXD file. One more question from Michael in Springfield. Can you bring in different geographic and project coordinate systems into one map? And the answer to that is yes, you can. One very important component of that is to make sure that your service does have some georeferencing. In order to establish that, you'll need to edit that axle file, that map configuration file, and to point to the coordinate system that it's using. For more information on that, there's a lot of good documentation that's available on the support webpage. And also, if you look at the January to March 2005 ArcUser magazine, there's a good article to be able to describe how to be able to do that. It is a really critical point to communicate to you guys. All right, Danielle, back to you.
Thanks again. All right, so let's take a look at the final step in creating an ArcIMS website. At this point, you have defined the content of your map and created a service that is available through the internet. This service can be viewed by already existing applications such as ArcMap or ArcExplorer. We will now go on to step 3 in the process, assuming that you will want to design your own customized viewer using out-of-the-box ArcIMS functionality. For this purpose, we will use the ArcIMS Designer. ArcIMS Designer consists of a wizard interface that can be used to create an ArcIMS viewer. When you launch the application, you will go through a series of panels that allow you to specify the website directory name and title, the services that will be used in the website, either from your own machine or others on the internet. The ArcIMS Designer will be used to create 2 different types of viewers, HTML or Java. HTML viewers are very light on the client side and require only the use of an internet browser. Java viewers, either custom or standard, require the user to have an internet browser and the Java plugin on their machine. Depending on the viewer you select, the panels you see will also begin to vary. There will be options for specifying such things as the extent of the data, overview map content, and the tools. Finally, you will give a website location. Upon installation, a specific location on your machine is set up for all websites to be saved and made viewable for the public. Commonly, this is the ArcIMS website directory. Once we click that Create Website button, what we've actually just done is to create a directory of HTML and JavaScript files that work together to produce your final website. Your finished website using the out-of-the-box templates will look very much like this. We have a simple gray background, a toolbar, and some basic components of layer lists and legends. You might recognize these components from the examples we showed you at the beginning of the seminar. These qualities are fully customizable once you have made your website. Colors, layouts, the use of pop-up menus, or built-in areas of your website can all be changed through the core website files. So let's go through step 3, using those services that we've created that then stem from those files that we created in the first part of the demonstration. So here what I'm going to use is the ArcIMS Designer application. And the first panel that you're going to have when you launch this application is this one, Create a Website. So here I'm going to type in a name for that folder that's going to contain all of my different files. Next, I'm going to type in a title for this web page. So here it's going to be my first website. Website San Diego. Then I'm going to click Next. So here's where I'm going to specify the service or services that I would like to have in my main map display. So in this case, I'm going to use my image service called San Diego. Next, I specify the type of viewer I want to create. We're going to go through with an HTML viewer. And here you'll start seeing how the different panels are going to start changing depending on your choices. This panel here is for the map extent. And here I'm going to specify just the extent of all the services since I have just the one loaded. But if you had multiple services, then you could choose which one you're going to use for your initial extent and then what the limit is going to be on that website as well. Now, here I'm going to specify a service for the overview map. And so this is where our ArcMap image service is going to come in, OV San Diego. On this panel here, you're going to need to know a little bit of information about your data. My data source units are in feet, and I want my scale bar units to be miles. Now this is my favorite panel. This is the one where you get to use these checkboxes and decide which tools you want to have available on your website. Yes, I really like this. I don't have to write all of this code. I can just use these checkboxes. You'll notice that some of these are grayed out, and this will happen according to some of the specifications you may or may not have made in that map configuration file. My final panel here is going to ask me whereabouts to store this website. And as I mentioned earlier, we're going with this C ArcIMS website directory. I click on the Create Website button, and I get a summary. We created a website called San Diego in this directory location using both of our services that we have running. I'm going to exit the application and confirm. So now the question is, how do I see my website? Well, I'm going to go to a browser, and here I can type in the address. So my machine is the local host, and it's going to be my website location, and I called it San Diego. Click Enter, and here you see the website that we just created. So I have options to turn my overview map on and off. So you'll see here my OV San Diego service, and here you see my plain San Diego service. And I've got functionality included here to switch between legends and layers, and I can use these navigation tools to be able to zoom into my data. And remember, we set up scale dependencies on our labeling, and so on. We've also got functionality to get information out of the database. So I can use the Identify button, and I can click on one of my major attractions here to get some of the data displayed. I'll just make sure that I have to get it bang on there. That tolerance for clicking on a feature can also be set through some of the website files as well. And here you can access information about a specific major attraction. Well, it looks like we have a few more minutes, so I'm going to pass things over to Mark to answer a few more of your questions.
Okay, we have some time left, some really good questions. One comes from Leonard in Pittsburgh and also from Peter in Wenatchee, both in essence asking the same question. Actually, that's Paul from Madison. Can ArcIMS let viewers hyperlink points to other websites or electronic documents? And the answer to that is yes. In that HTML viewer that Danielle just created, there is a file that is created within that folder called ArcIMS param.js. It's just a text file that stores a number of different variables. If you open up this text file in a text editor, you can enable a hyperlink tool just by making that variable true, and also establishing what layer you're going to be hyperlinking on, and also what field will contain the link that you want to hyperlink to. Once you set those variables and refresh your web browser, you'll be able to enable that functionality. And once again, there's some good documentation on how to be able to set that up. Peter from Wenatchee has this question. With an image service, what kind of image type has the best redisplay time? And really that's dependent on what type of data you're serving and how much data you're going to be distributing to your clients. In general terms, a JPEG image is good if you have some imagery that you want to serve over the web, such as aerial photographs or some satellite imagery that you have. JPEGs maintain the lossy quality of those images. If you're using a lot of vector data, such as points and lines and polygons, then perhaps a GIF or a PNG will be more preferable because the file sizes tend to be smaller for those cases. Also, a consideration to think about when you're picking an image type is transparencies. So if you want to have a transparent image, you might want to choose a GIF image instead. Aaron from Kansas City has a good question. Would I need to know programming languages in order to use ArcIMS more effectively? Once again, that depends on what type of client that you want to build for your web pages. In Danielle's example, she built an HTML viewer. Probably if you want to be able to do some customizations, be able to create custom tools, or be able to change the interface, then a lot of knowledge of HTML and JavaScript will be beneficial if you want to make those changes to that type of viewer. But you'd also have other alternatives as well. For example, if I wanted to build an active server page, I'll need to know ASP. Or if I wanted to build something using JSP, Java server pages, then I'll need to understand that programming language. So really, it depends on what type of client that you're going to be building. Ujvala from Los Angeles. What is the difference between a spatial server and the application server? Once again, those are two different components of ArcIMS that have a special function. The application server is the traffic cop, as Danielle describes, basically taking in these different requests that come in and distributing that load to the various spatial servers that you may have in your configuration. So think of the application server, I always think of it as middle management, passing the buck to the worker bee. And really that's what the spatial server is. The spatial server is that component of ArcIMS that is generating the imagery to be able to produce those maps that you see in your client. Let's see, two more. Joe from Augusta. Can ArcIMS services be configured to provide clients with access to attribute data or subsets of attribute data? And the answer to that is yes. You are able to, for example, with the extract server functionality that's included with ArcIMS, be able to distribute data if you wanted to. So I can add a tool to an HTML viewer, for example, to be able to download that data and be able to access its attribute data within that data set. And if I'm pretty clever, I'm also, through custom requests, be able to download just subsets of that data that the client is requesting. So that's a pretty cool function of ArcIMS, being able to download that data. One final question from Pat in Seaside. Is a Java application server needed to run ArcIMS? Yes, there is a Java component that is required on the server side to make ArcIMS work. Since the ArcIMS applications, author, administrator, and designer are written in Java. So, on the server side, you will need a Java runtime environment, a JRE, to be able to make those functions work. If you are intending to use the Java connector, then you'll need to get the Java Software Development Kit, the JSDK, which includes the JRE. And once again, go to support.esri.com to get a complete list of which JREs are supported with ArcIMS. Okay, that's all the time I have, so I'll let Danielle wrap up.
Thanks very much. Well, it's looking like we're out of time for today, But for more information, I wanted to direct you to a few different locations. For more information about ArcIMS and how to use it, I'd like to direct you to our virtual campus and instructor-led courses. We have both introductory as well as advanced classes for the customization and administration of ArcIMS. The website examples we showed at the beginning of this presentation are part of the ESRI User Showcase, accessible from the ArcIMS software page on esri.com. In addition, we also have an IMS registry where organizations can register their websites. On behalf of ESRI, I'd like to thank you all very much for attending.